And one mic passed around, so we're gonna have to share.
All right, I mean, this is where my passion comes from. So I was a closet gay man in the NFL for 9 years, 35 years of my life. It actually, my passion came when I played here with the Atlanta Falcons. We went to the Super Bowl. And I remember sitting in the lobby, right, with all the other players, and as their families would come in, and they would be introduced to other, players and families. And then my partner at the time would come in and walk the opposite direction, right? So when he walked out, everything else walked out with him. So that is why I have this passion to sort of bridge that gap and to try to push forward for us. So my brothers that are still playing in the league can have a safe environment. And my brothers who played in the league that made it what it is today, right? Along with everybody else that played in the NFL, right? That's so we can exist. Right? So people, kids, youth can know that they were gay NFL players. Period.
Go to Greg.
I'm Greg. little white top now. But I guess my passion really comes from it. My journey of self-acceptance. I mean, that's really the first person that you have to come out to is yourself. And I had an interesting journey because I was out to my friends and family while I was competing. I was encouraged not to come out to the members of the media. And I justified that everybody's entitled to a private life, and I also didn't want it to become, because I'm in a subjective sport, I didn't want it to become about the gay diver, the gay athlete. So I adhered to that, and then I signed on with William Morris Agency, and I said, well, I'll tone down the gay thing. That was in '84, after my Olympics there, and then I competed for 4 more years to '88. I didn't come out as a gay man until '94 at the Gay Games in New York, and I knew that was just a baby step because my book Breaking the Surface was coming out the following year, and that was coming out. That was a biggie because I was coming out about my HIV status. That I was diagnosed HIV positive in 1988, 6 months prior to the Olympic Games. My thought at that time, because this was a sign of the times, was that if my test, when they were running the test, if that test came back positive, I was training in Florida, my home was in California, I was gonna pack my bags and go back home, lock myself in my house and wait to die. And that's what we thought of HIV at the time. And so really my inspiration to get through the 1988 Olympic Games, especially after hitting my head on the board, my inspiration was Ryan White, who is a young boy, hemophiliac, who contracted HIV through his clotting factor. And he became a friend because he was exposed to so much hate. And so I reached out to him back in, 86, 87, when the article came out. And so I reached out to him feeling that if people see that I'm not afraid of him, then other people wouldn't be afraid. And he became a dear friend. I didn't share my HIV status with him, but he was my inspiration. And that's the reason why I gave my 1988 Olympic gold medal to Jeannie White. And it's at the Ryan White Museum in Indiana. So yeah, I have many people who've been my inspiration. And also it's been so gratifying too, because in diving, we have Matthew Mitchum, who came out while he was still competing, Olympic gold medalist in 2000, it was Beijing. 2008. 2008. So he was an Olympic gold medalist, and then Tom Daly, who's still competing. He's a dear friend. So I like to think that I kind of paved the way for them, to be comfortable, to be who they are, and be visible and not hide in the shadows. You know, I think that's what really kind of keeps me going.
Thank you for that.
Hard to follow, but for me, it's pretty simple. I'm a little girl from South Central Los Angeles who's seen the world through sports. My passion is really driven by having the courage to be unapologetically you. And the world forever has taught me as a Black, lesbian, strong, muscular, bald woman that I needed to be one of two things. And my passion is driven from being the thing that I decided to be, and that's courageous. And I learned that from my mother, and that's taken me a lot of places, and that just influencing that courage in other boys and girls, and doing it in a sport like football, where it's not necessarily okay or normal to be a strong, physical, aggressive woman, and that's what I plan to keep going.
David was talking with Odessa a couple of days ago that I realized what our conversation today is really about. Money.
Greenbacks.
Talk all we want about all these lovely things, but at the end of the day, it's all about money. Corporations, nonprofits, professional athletes, they want to make money. Odessa, how do we frame this conversation about the work that we want to see done in a way that reflects these entities, corporations, nonprofits, and athletes, need and desire to make money?
Yeah, for me it's very simple. Conceptually, it's the idea of doing good to do good. If we can always do well when we do good, then we'll be influenced to continue to do good in the world. And it just needs to be broken down at that level for every project that we work on. I think ignoring the idea that there's a top line and that there's a bottom line in any business conversation that you have is not being true to your purpose, it's not being true to your outcome. I think that needs to be present in every discussion that we have, that money matters, that dollars matter. Now, whether or not they drive the decision, that's one thing, or that's a different conversation. But ultimately, we need to know the impact of the thing that we're doing to the dollar and be okay to say that. If supporting women's tackle football is a loss leader in this area, how does it support you in that area? And then I think it's okay to have those conversations with people. Not only that you wish to sell to your consumers, but also the entities that you're looking to help.
You know, I know that since you took the presidency at Adidas last summer, you focused on making diversity and inclusion a priority. How do you internally have those conversations, again, convincing people that this is going to make us more money? Because ultimately, Adidas is a for-profit company, and that is the goal.
It's funny, we actually don't take that approach at all. It's the right thing to do. So we want to be the best sports brand in the world. And what does that mean? That means when people talk about us and we're not in the room, they say they're the best because of X, Y, Z reason. So to flip the conversation, we believe that through sport, we have the power to change lives. Odessa's story, Greg's story, Esera's story, my own personal story on track and field as well, changed my life. So what we want to do is make sure that A, we have an inclusive environment in the workplace, that people feel safe, embraced, and I'll never forget the quote that I saw from Pharrell Williams last year: "It's beauty is in the difference." And I stole this slide, and invited him to Portland. We had him on stage, and we must embrace all of our differences. When we embrace that, we create a fantastic environment, the team's happier, and as a result, engagement goes through the roof. When engagement goes through the roof, profit follows. So we don't go out there and say, we want to do this to support Esera or whatever it may be, to create money. We do it as the right thing to do and to change lives.
But ultimately, you believe that by changing lives and engaging in this space, that the profits will follow.
But when you change lives and people understand your mission and embrace the brand and what we stand for, hopefully they go and buy your product. But I want to be crystal clear, this is not about us driving our top line and bottom line. This is about making sure that we provide access to sport, they're safe, we provide them the equipment. Over time, hopefully brand advocacy kicks in, they can make them buy products.
So anybody can talk about any company that they want, but since we have the president of America here, some of the questions, it's a good case study, right, that we can talk about. And I'm curious, as running a nonprofit, how you have experienced working with Adidas and other corporations, and how you have gone about getting from them some of the resources that you need to do the work you want to do.
Well, first of all, if I look tired to you, it's because I am. Hate is wrong, along with two of my board members, we are a three-man operation. I have raised over probably $200,000-300,000 for other nonprofits. I've worked with good ones, and I've worked with bad ones, and you learn from your mistakes, right? So when I created Hate is Wrong, I wanted to make sure, and I told my board members that we are going to raise money to give money, right? I don't get a salary, none of them get a salary, we're all volunteer, and especially doing something around Super Bowl, there's always that perception like, oh my gosh, you're doing it for money, right? Not at all. The money that we raise at the Inclusion Party stays in the city where the Inclusion Party is for anti-bullying programs. The reason I look tired, along with a lot of my board members, is because it's just the three of us throwing a big party, right? So keeping the costs down. I think for us, it's focusing on the cause, right? The reason why I focus on the cause is because I was bullied back when I was a little kid. Yeah, the 6'4", 300-pound Samoan, right? So that's why I tell my board members, we have to stay focused on the cause, and everything else will come with it, right? Adidas, I met Adidas about 4 years ago at a summit at the USC, what did you say? An Inclusion Summit. Just met this guy right here, talked story, talked about our cultures, where we're from, right? A couple years later, we were in a pickle that we needed somebody to support us. And I reached out to Adidas, knowing all the work that they have done on diversity and inclusion and watching all the videos and all of that, the pride that they have to making it better for everyone. That's why I reached out to Zion, and it was no question. He just said, got it, you're done. Right? So we have been partnered with them, and we are so honored to be with Adidas, with the Minnesota Vikings, who have started something last summer with inclusion and continuing the work that they do so we can push it forward, right? Tito's is jumping on board. So I've learned a lot, seriously. This is our second year, and we're gonna need help. But right now, with the three of us, we're good. And we're keeping the costs down so we can give more money, right? So, but I'm definitely learning a lot with all sponsorships and all of that. And you have to hustle and you have to ask. You know, my dad always said the thing below your nose and above your chin is a mouth, because you need to use it, right? And that's why I tell a lot of the kids back in when I do my anti-bullying programs, right? You know, for them, I think a lot of them have lost their voices, right? The whole sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me needs to be rewritten because words kill, right? So that's the thing. I tell them to use the thing below the nose and above the chin, their voice, right? They need to find their voices. We, as Hate is Wrong, have found our voices through Adidas, through the Minnesota Vikings, the NFL, Tito's, and people that want to do good.
Greg, when did you finally end up on the OB's bus?
What was it? Last year, year before last? Right. It was very recently.
Right, and it was 30 years ago that you won back-to-back double golds in the Olympics.
Right.
How have you seen how corporations have changed in their engagement of this space?
Well, it was interesting because there was, years ago, there was an article written by Chicago writer, sports writer. Anyways, we were talking about endorsements, and me being a gay man and endorsements. And you know, he said, well, what about, you were never offered a cereal box. Well, at the time, you know, the only company that was doing cereal box covers was Wheaties. And it was very iconic and that sort of thing. But Kellogg's, back in the day, we were in conversation with Kellogg's. I said, well, I was approached by a cereal. I didn't name the cereal, but he did research. He called Wheaties and said, why haven't had Greg Louganis on a cover of a Wheaties box? And what was reported to him was because I didn't reflect the American family values, the values that they hold. And this was many years ago. And so then after my documentary Back on Board, which was on HBO, we were actually nominated for an Emmy. After that, there was somebody who watched the documentary and said, oh my God, he's never had a Wheaties box, So she wrote in, and I didn't know what a big deal that was until we were filming the documentary, and I was at the International Swimming Hall of Fame, and then you go through this whole aisle, and it's Wheaties box after Wheaties box after Wheaties box of these incredible aquatic athletes, and I wasn't there. And so that's when it dawned on me how iconic that is. And so then I understood what the hubbub was all about. Well, this fan I think she's in Ohio, Julie Sondra, she wrote into General Mills and said, you gotta get Greg Louganis on a Wheaties box. He deserves a Wheaties box. He deserved way back when, and went on. And then they had a conversation that all of those people who were there before, who said those things in the past, are no longer there, and they had a different attitude, and so then they came up with this, recognizing legends. And so I was a part of the series of legends. And it's funny because I still get fan mail saying, oh, I remember when you were on the Wheaties box, way back when. Well, I was just on the Wheaties box, and that was the first one that I ever had. They did use an old picture of my diving days, but it was the perception of that, and I thought that was really really important, for them to say, look, we've had a change of heart. We're seeing things in a different light. And I think that's what's so important, is you be your authentic self. Be who you are, and be true to yourself, and be kind to yourself and others, then things can turn around. I think that's what it is. And that's what I try and do, is not lead by, oh, I did this, I did that, I did this. It's by doing. What do you do?
So I want to actually, go ahead and take it. I don't want to come back to Greg with something. Well, okay, actually, I want to stay with Greg. I want to stay with Greg. The rate of Olympians and pro athletes, men or women, coming out, just kind of stayed flat for a few years now. What role do they have in moving the needle forward? And should we be pushing them to come out? Or how can we be supporting them in a way that will encourage them to do so?
Right. The biggest fear, especially in individual sports, because oftentimes you rely on sponsorship. And Ken Gusworth, he's another one, aerial skier, freestyle skier. He came to me and he said, oh, I'm about to come out in a very big way, and I'm still competing, what should I expect? And we just chatted. But it's that sort of thing to have those corporations. I remember when my book was going to be published, I was still with Speedo. And Authentic Fitness, and then my contract was up right before the book was going to be released, so I'd be free of any morals clauses. And then Linda Wagner, who was CEO of Speedo at the time, I said, Paul, she said that she wanted to negotiate for a few more years. And so I said, well, Linda, we gotta sit down and talk, and I told her what was coming out in my book. I was coming out about my sexual identity, and also about my HIV status, and her response to me was, I want to support you, and that I will have their support for my lifetime. Unfortunately, they went into chapter 13, and then she was removed, and I don't think that Speedo expected me to live as long as I have, so they thought they were, oh, he's gonna go away soon, and I'm still here. So they made it really impossible for me to meet my obligations to them, and so then I had to walk away.
I want to talk about, as we're looking at these efforts to change sports. And we have professional sports, and the needs are very different there from what they are in youth sports. Also, the number of athletes is vastly different. Where do you think we should be focusing our efforts to improve our environment? And where does Adidas, what level of sport does Adidas focus on?
Yes, I think this is,
What am I saying it wrong? It's Adidas. I'm so sorry.
in American was Adidas.
Okay, all right, that's all right.
But I'm in German, it's Adidas.
All right.
I nearly make a mistake. I think first and foremost, this is not just pro, it starts at youth. So we need to ensure that the entire community is aware of this and we embrace that. It starts at home, so from parenting, certainly in schools, but most importantly, I think with coaches. That coaches need to role model the way and make sure that environment is inclusive and safe. Some things that we've done in the last few years, we've changed all of our sports marketing contracts. So whether we assign an individual, a federation, a team, that there can be no discrimination. If there is discrimination, we have the ability to pull out of that contract. So we're trying to make sure that that's crystal clear. At the same time, we had Esera join us, I think it was February last year in Portland, and we bring all the team together. So we call it all-employee meeting huddle. And we also had Robbie Roger Projects come and join us as well. So twice in the year we had open players that have gone to the elite level, talking to our team about their journey to make sure we can understand that, to put that back into our marketing, how we can take the community.
Z mentioned coaches, Odessa, and athletes come and go, but coaches stay. How do you reach a coach? How do you educate a coach and convince a coach that by changing language and developing a more inclusive space, they'll win more games?
I think one of the best things about coaches is that they love to learn. You know, you hear great coaches say all the time is that you never know enough. No coach knows enough. You always see Phil Jackson, you see Belichick. They're always studying these guys. And these great coaches, they're always studying the game, studying something else, things that have nothing to do with their sport. So a great way to get coaches is to get them in their mind, right? To feed that need to learn more. And I think there's always a fever, if you truly want to coach for a long time, to help that athlete develop, to help them be different than they were when they came to you. So I don't think that there isn't a need or want or thirst to do that for coaches, as Adidas or Adidas and other companies are doing these kind of things that makes it valuable to coaches. And athletes, prominent athletes, are showing that it was valuable to them. I think coaches will continue. But again, it all starts at home with parents. It starts with our school systems and even some of our amateur and top-level sports. It has to be built into the curriculum of what you're doing. The coaches will go learn it. It just has to be put somewhere where it's easy to access.
So I'm going to push back on you just a little bit, because I've talked to many coaches who do not see the value of these conversations with their teams. They don't want them. They don't even want to say to the team at a team meeting, you know, I just want to let you know, if you're LGBTQ, I'm okay with that. And this is to say, you don't even want to say that. How do you break through that when you have from the coach, and some coaches, they just want X's and O's and as little as possible of players' personal lives, certainly at the high levels, focused on the sport. How do you break through that? Because that is a dynamic that I've seen on different teams.
Yeah, I think it has to be in a part of the organization. There's a place and time for everything, particularly when you're coaching. When you're standing up in front of your team and you're talking about the X's and the O's, no, I don't want to hear about who you love and how you love them. But if I have an opportunity, if I'm put in a position to do that as a coach, whether it be at the professional level or at the high school level or at the secondary level, then I think coaches are more interested to do it. Again, if it's a part of the organization pattern, whether it's someone of influence, whether there's a diversity inclusion officer on the coaching staff, those kind of things that kind of influences the coaches to have that moment with the athlete, then they will have that moment with the athlete. So I don't think coaches are against having the conversation. It's where and when do you have it.
And maybe working with them and training them on the right ways to frame it and the right time to do it. That can be a way to help them break through. Everybody, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I would love to. So one of the things that I do is since I came out, I go around the country and I speak on homophobia in sports. And it's so funny because I reach out always. I've done probably maybe 80 to maybe 90 schools to talk to them. And but every time I talk to, we'll go to a school, I try to reach out to their athletic department, right? And no one gets back to me. So out of those 80 schools that I've talked to and I've reached out to, probably I've done only maybe 15 of them, right? For me, it's just common sense. Raise your hand if you know what's good and bad. Seriously, right? There's one rule with my kids, right? Do the right thing, right? You do the right thing. Or if you don't do the right thing, there's consequences. Sometimes we sort of kind of skip around everything instead of going very direct, right? So when I meet with these athletic departments and we talk to the coach, the question is like, what can we do? Really? Like, what can I do? Well, we all know as athletes that there's a meeting in every single year, a first meeting, right? We talk about respecting women, we talk about everything under the sun except for the LGBTQ community. So for me, it's like this simple. All you have to say is, I am not going to tolerate anything in my locker room, right? The word fag, queer, and homo is not going to be tolerated, period. It helps, right? Because the gay athlete that's in that group kind of realize now, wow, I have a coach that supports, right? I'm going to the right school that supports us. I spoke at the rookie symposium 20 years ago and never got invited back. No, I'm kidding. No, I didn't. But I don't know why. I'm not sure why. I thought it was an amazing, I did a workshop there. I was so excited because the LGBTQ community was going to be implemented into the already diversity program that they have in the NFL. And this was like 15 years ago when I spoke at the Rookie Symposium. So out of all the 300 athletes, top athlete, one stupid question, right? One stupid question. You want to know what it is? So he goes, the top athlete, he goes, so if I call you a fag and you are a fag, is that degrading? And it took me so much to jump over the table and take him out, but I looked around the room, and all the players were looking at him and saying are you kidding me? Right? Seriously? It was just, so when I saw that, this is what I told him. It doesn't matter, right? If you use the word gay, faggot, and queer, if you use it in a wrong way to degrade somebody, right, it's wrong. So it's just like using the N-word, right? Using a B word, can't. I know the coach is always like, well, that's just how it is. Wow, back in the days, that's how it was, but then they changed it, right? So why not change it, right? I think changing the language in the locker room and getting the support from the coaches and the hierarchy, I think would be a great way for us to get in there and change the dynamics and environment so my brothers or any sisters in professional sports can feel comfortable coming out.
One of the things that, okay, you want to?
I think it's two things. Number one, it starts at the top. So if the coach is not embracing it, even who are the coach's superiors needs to embrace it and lead by example. When you see corporations or teams lead by example, others will follow. Secondly, though, you need a team around it constantly working on this. So there's a lot in this room that we call our EIG group, which is Employee Resource Group, the LGBTQ team, and they're out there every single day helping push our cause, and I couldn't do this without them. So I want to acknowledge my team as well. And the more they talk about it, the more it's embraced. Now it's normal. A couple of years ago it wasn't. Now it's leading by example, and it's not even discussed anymore.
In an individual sport like diving, this is why I admire Matthew Mitchell so much, because he came out while he was still competing. Because the reason that he gave why he came out was because he didn't feel that he could compete at that high level and only sharing a part of himself. And I admire that because I understood that. For me personally, it was motivation. I didn't want to show those people who were calling me fag, sissy, homo, all that stuff. I wanted my performance to speak for itself. I didn't want to have to speak for my performance, or justify myself in any way, or apologize for myself in any way. So I spoke through my performance, but Matthew, he didn't feel that he could compete at that high level. So when you talk about performance, that it does have an effect on an athlete, that they can be true to who they are and not have to hide. I was in USA Diving. Everybody knew about my sexual identity because there was a secret meeting that would happen on international trips for a small team, and it was who was going to room with the fag. And I learned about that much later, and really, I don't know how much of that was true homophobia or how much of that was jealousy, because I was winning at the time. In some of the instances, I do think it was homophobia. But, and also you mentioned coaches. My coach was incredibly supportive, Ron O'Brien, and I came out to him about my sexual identity, my HIV status, everything. He allowed me that space, and also, defended me, stood up for me. And now, even today, I get contact by other coaches saying, well, I have a gay athlete, what do I do? And opening up that conversation, opening up the dialogue, allowing athletes to express themselves and have a voice and have their, show them that they have value, to create value and celebrate who they are and not have any type of shame.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up to the audience for this panel. And one of the things that I've been working on over the last couple of years is former NFL player Ryan O'Callahan, his memoirs. And he talks about that day that, as Rich just described, at the symposium, when the player asked that question about can you ask a fag if he's a fag, if that's okay? And what he talks about is it was the first time he ever, because of the way the players around him reacted, they didn't like that question. It was the first time he thought, maybe the sports world isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Didn't stop him from going down the road to suicide, but it opened his mind, opened his eyes. How do we open people's eyes? Most specifically, those athletes who are struggling with fear, to where sports are today. That is so much more accepting. Not all the way there, so much more accepting and open than we realize. How do we open athletes' eyes to that?
That's why, that's why we created Hate is Wrong, and we created the Super Bowl inclusion party and now the panel, so we could have a presence at the Super Bowl. Right? So people could understand the LGBTQ community was represented at the Super Bowl, where many years before it hasn't been. Right? That's why last year when we did the inclusion party, we got a lot of hate and we got a lot of love, right? It was one of those things, but we, again, stayed focused on the cause and what we wanted the message to be. So we got a lot of media attention and we used it in the right direction, in the positive direction, trying to show people and stuff that of who we are as the LGBTQ community and where we are, as an athlete and stuff like that. So that's one of the biggest reasons why. And I think the more we move forward and we have discussions like this and we come together as a group, I think that's going to help a lot. Getting the conversations out there on the table to talk about, right? So just like think back when the conversations of LGBTQ families was on the table to talk about in the political realm, that sort of kind of opened a lot of people's eyes, right? Because then they figured out like, oh, wait a minute, they're talking about my brother, my sister, my aunt, my uncle. And so that, what happens when you put it on the table for people to talk about, that's when, for me, I think the healing starts, right? Because the conversations are happening, right? People start looking within their hearts and their souls. It's like, wait a minute, right? There's only so much you can hate until the heart kicks in, right? You start looking around your environment, you start looking around your area, and you find brothers and sisters and people that are in a part of the LGBTQ community, right? For me, 9 years in the NFL, I created this saying: hate in any form is wrong. Hate in any form is wrong. It was an umbrella because I was in the closet back then. It wasn't good. Please. Every time the topic of homosexuality would come up, it was always negative. A fight would break out, or things would happen. So I created this umbrella because you could put everything underneath that, right? Sexism, racism, homophobia, all of that. So if anybody said something in the locker room, I would just say, dude, eating uniform is wrong, right? Said something about homophobia, dude, eating uniform is wrong, right? So that's why I created that. And it's so, for me, I'm so proud of my crew and what we've established now. So hopefully in the future we can move forward with the NFL and with Adidas and everyone else and educate people and make sure it's a safe environment for all athletes.
Okay, a question? Anybody want to ask a question? So right here.
I'm Eddie Young with the Federation of Gay Games. One thing we haven't touched on today is the role of religion and what that plays and feeds into the homophobia and how that creeps into sports in various ways that we all know about. I wonder if you can address that.
I grew up First Samoan Assembly Hallelujah Church. And I say it like that because that's how it was when I was in Hawaii. And so I read the Bible a couple of times, right? And so it was one of those things, it is a very, for me, I do also debates on homophobia and homosexuality and religion. And so it's one of those things, right? I was with Jacksonville Jaguar. And if you know Jacksonville Jaguar, a couple of years ago, it was very much a religious team. So if you weren't part of the Bible study and stuff, you sort of come with excluded from everything else. And so I remember going to one of their Bible studies, and they were preaching. And then it was one of those things where, so I asked the question, so I have a brother that was gay. So you're telling me if my brother that was gay, when he dies and he repents and he asks God for forgiveness, that they wouldn't, but they would forgive Hitler. I asked that question, and they said yes. And I was like, are you kidding me? I'm not kidding. And it was such, for me, I went home and I cried and I prayed because I know the truth, right? I mean, for me and stuff, I read a scripture when I was a young kid, and it was, don't put your trust in the flesh because the flesh will fail you, but put your trust in God because He'll never fail you. But when I read that as a young kid, that helped me throughout my whole years, right? Because I know if God doesn't create mistakes, and I'm not a mistake, and if I was born this way, so it would be unlawful for me to lay with another woman than it is a man because I couldn't give him my heart. And let me tell you, this is my belief. It may not be your belief. People ask the question all the time, do you think homosexuality is a sin? I say absolutely not. But if you're asking me if I'm a sinner, yes, because we're all fall short of the glory of God, meaning all of us are sinners, right? So if you've gone to church and you don't know that and stuff, it's just one of those things where I think we have, as the LGBTQ community, have been sort of pounced and punched on by the religious community about how we are going to go to hell. And I always ask the question, how do you have the authority, right? Because no one has the authority, please. So I'm sorry if I'm sort of preaching this right now, but what I was thinking is, another big question they have is, what is that? If I'm going to heaven. Of course, everybody's going to heaven, right? If you believe, because it's already been paid. Jesus Christ died on the cross for me, for you, for the present and past. Wow, present and past. So if you don't know it, so when I go around the country and I talk about things, the Bible, and I always say, read the book, right? It's like, you gotta read the book. Because you don't do like a book report and not read the book, right? You don't do a book report from what you hear from people see on television. You read the book, right? I'm serious. So if you want answers, read the book. I'm sorry. But anyway, I'm sorry, if I've gone up too far still with the religion, all it is, regardless if you don't like the color of my hair, the color of my hair, my skin, or who I decide to give my heart to, I'm still a child of God. So if you're going to judge on me, I'm going to say on Judgment Day, you're going to be judged.
So I want to ask Odessa, because obviously Christianity is all over this country, but I think it's everywhere in Texas where you are. How do we, particularly in the sports world, the long history of Christianity and masculinity and sports in America, how do we break through the traditional perspective of homosexuality in Christianity in the sports world and coexist and make it a better place?
So I'm going to borrow from Zion on that point, because that is one place where it does start from the top. I think we are absolutely influenced by our leaders in those cases. The pastor of your church, right? As much as religion is all over and Christianity is all over Texas, there are actually a lot of very inclusive churches. I actually attend one. And so there are a lot of inclusive people in the South. And so, but it all starts at the top, it all starts at the head, it all starts with your pastor, with your coaches. If it is built in, if inclusion is built into your process, if it's in the fiber of what you do, if you say it in your church, if you say gay, if you say husband, if you say wife, those are the things, that language that you start to perpetuate in people actually has them to have conversations that beget inclusion. And so I think for me, it's very simple when it comes to something like that. I simplify things that seem so complex, because I think that's how the world changes, is when you simplify things that are complex. And in this case, I think if we start from the top and our leaders, our parents, and give them tools, introduce them to people, introduce them to concepts that help them realize that it is a safe space to talk about LGBT and Christianity in the same breath, then we start to elicit change.
Other questions? Go right here.
Hi, I'm a Serving Legacy Athlete Ally Ambassador. I think within the sports world, we continually focus on how we can do hate through athletic community and coaches, but what about the fan base and mechanisms of hate and how they manifest themselves? Because obviously it's very disconcerting for an athlete when they step out into the field and you have 80,000 fans chanting not only racist slurs, sexist slurs, but also homophobic slurs. So what kind of responsibility do the sports companies, sports organizations, and athletic teams play in terms of looking at educating the fan base?
I'd like Zion to take that, and also I just want to kind of put some context on that. There's a lot of homophobic chanting in European soccer, but now with the Puto chant and coming to the United States, in MLS playoff games, and I know Adidas has a good relationship across soccer. How are you handling it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So we've got to go a level above. So a couple of things that immediately spring to mind is, how do we educate the world or the community or the country or whatever leader it may be to ensure that everyone understands that this is what we stand for. So back in 2017, Valentine's Day, on our own Instagram handle, we posted a picture of the same-sex couple kissing. We had over 275,000 likes. It just blew up the internet. But at the same time, we received some really significant pushback saying, hey, this should be for boys and girls, and W2F, I'm going to go and buy competitive brand, our response was a brilliant yes. So we told the entire world this is what we stand for. So that was one example. Most recently, the New Zealand All Blacks, the best sporting team in the history of the world in terms of win rate, had to get that in there. It's not too late. But yeah, the All Blacks jersey is sacred in my country. Absolutely sacred. Every kid is born, first thing you want to be is an All Black or Black if you're a female. Just recently, we developed a rainbow jersey. So as you pull the jersey, it was the rainbow colour of sport, Pride Day. That's the All Blacks, the most toughest sport down under. So again, we went above saying this is what we stand for. That has to cascade to the fan. The fan sees when the All Black captain and the entire team is standing there saying we embrace this, then the fans can't push back. So it's hard to attack an individual fan, but it's very good. It's not easy, but it's more important that we tackle it at this level. And then locally here with MLS or National Hockey League, we partner very closely with both federations that on Pride Day, every single team is also going out doing events with us. So there's a lot we can do, and those are 3 or 4 examples that we've done ourselves.
And are you taking any steps into addressing the homophobic chanting in European soccer and in Major League Soccer that's happened several times this year?
Yeah, so I'm not sure of those details, but if it was a situation that we believed it was our moral responsibility, we would certainly speak to the club or the federation, reinforcing what we stand for and what are they going to do about it.
All right, time for 1 or 2 more questions. What's that? Absolutely.
I'm curious, Greg, you were talking about the response and reaction with Weeds and how they had ignored you and they didn't want to be part of you. And then years later came back and their reasoning, whether it was true or not, was that it's a different leadership group. And that's exactly right. So your facial expression. How, for all of you, how do you handle but I want to start with you, Greg, the forgiveness of, and the acceptance of people who are at one point ignorant, and then change their behavior, and they change their truth. So how did you work yourself through that, and how did you feel about the whole general noise?
Well, I mean, with regard to how I feel about the whole General Mills today, I don't look past. I really didn't think that it was that big of a deal when I was diving, and I also stated when I was given the cover of the Wheaties box, I felt that it was more meaningful to me because in my mind's eye, I was being embraced as a whole person. They knew who I was. They knew, they knew all of those things that I always questioned when I was younger, and embraced me. So I was appreciative of that. And I remember too, as far as forgiveness, right after my book came out in '95, I booked a speaking engagement in Lawrence, Kansas, right in the backyard of Reverend Fred Phelps. And this is before anybody knew about my HIV status. And then when the story broke on Oprah Winfrey, well, first Barbara Walters and then 2020 and then Oprah Winfrey, it was kind of a big deal. Actually, Fred Phelps followed me on my book tour. But I was doing a speech at Lawrence, Kansas, and what happened was they said, okay, it's time for your speech. They're taking me through the bowels of the auditorium. And I said, well, isn't there a faster way to get to the stage? And they said, well, we don't want you to see what's going on outside. And I said, oh, I want to see. So then they took me up to the 3rd floor to make sure I was safe and everything. We looked down, and there's, Fred and all of his group, with Die-AIDS, faggot, you'll burn in hell, 666 on my forehead, and pictures came, and I thought, that's cool. That was so cool. I thought it was cool. And so then during the Q&A at that speaking engagement, somebody stood up and she said, well, Mr. Louganis, what do you think of the ignorance that's standing outside this building? I said, you mean Fred? And they kind of chuckled and I said, well, I feel like I should hand him a teddy bear and tell him he needs lots of hugs. Because anybody who spews that much hate can't like themselves very much. And so what I thought was cool, because you never know what people are actually listening to you. I always had a problem with that. But the LGBTQ student union sent him a bunch of teddy bears in my honor, telling him he needs lots of hugs. And I thought that was so cool. About forgiveness. If I don't forgive, then what I am doing is I am turning my power over to that individual entity that I feel wronged by. And I don't want to give my power away. So if somebody wrongs me in whatever way, as long as I hold on to that, any type of resentment or anything like that, that is hurting me. It's not hurting them. So by empowering myself, it's more empowering to forgive. And I mean, my husband, he said, well, how did you forgive your Jim, who raped me in the first year that we were together? How did you forgive him? And I was like, well, I prayed for him. I also took into consideration where he came from, and then because he was sexually abused as a child. So trying to be empathetic, but also that enabled me to get to that place where I could forgive him. It took a while. Oftentimes I would pray to an inanimate object that reminded me of him, and not with him in mind. But eventually I got there to where I could forgive him, because otherwise I'm giving somebody else my power, and I wanted to maintain my own power.
Bro? I think it's just, for me, it's just, me being a Christian and my faith in God. Like my whole life story, if you read my book, wasn't a Moana story at all. So I think it was my faith in God, and that I put my trust in Him, that sort of gave me the power to forgive, and the power to love, and the power to want to make change.
For me, it starts with purpose. And I'm slipping to the corporate side of the world. People don't come to work to build shoes and t-shirts. They come to what we stand for. If we can consistently set a really high bar and say this is what we stand for, we will be inclusive. And for the last 3 years, touch wood maybe 4, we've scored 100 out of 100 of the corporate quality index. We're number 1 in the world. That's why people want to come and work with us. So fight for talent. Now kids are interviewing us. It's not us interviewing them. They come in and say, tell me about what you do around this, what's your stance here. So I think for us, just making sure that we really live by our purpose and that's changing us.
For me, it's just, it's love. You don't have room for anything else when you operate in love. And I think that if you can continue to bring more of that to your life and around your life, then you will naturally forgive.
I just wanted to kind of recap. We wanted to focus on solutions, and we came up with a bunch of things, and I just want to recap some of the things that I took away from this conversation. One is that ask for help. There are corporations that are looking for opportunities to help this community and other D&I issues. Framing the ask in their language, and figuring out what they want, and building a partnership, not just a sponsorship. Helping coaches and sports leaders figure out how organically to talk about these issues. Talking and being present at events like this, identifying things like the Super Bowl and Final Four, and being present, just being here. And then finally, the power of forgiveness and being able to take who you may have identified as an enemy and make them an ally. So those are my takeaways. I wanted to thank you all for the conversation. We have a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back. But again, thank you all very much.
Feel free to talk to them.